So there I was, Cassie Rodriguez, 22 years old, and officially having the worst Tuesday of my life. One minute I'm delivering medical supplies to some backwater colony that probably needed more toilet paper than antibiotics. And the next minute I'm strapped to what can only be described as a dentist chair designed by someone who clearly had issues with dentists. The torture chamber looked like the set of a B-grade sci-fi movie from the 1980s. Purple lighting, unnecessary steam vents, and enough blinking lights to trigger a seizure. Whoever designed this place had definitely watched too many human horror films and completely missed the point about subtlety. My captors were quite the pair. Commander Vex stood about 7 feet tall, covered in scales that shifted from green to purple when he got excited, which seemed to be often. He had the kind of voice that suggested he practiced his evil monologues in the mirror every morning. Think discount Darth Vader with a superiority complex and you're halfway there. His assistant, Quirk, looked like someone had taken a pile of green jello, given it anxiety issues, and taught it to apologize for everything. The poor thing kept checking and rechecking a tablet that I assumed was either the torture manual or his grocery list. Hard to tell with aliens. They both worked for something called the Hegemony, which sounded exactly as friendly as you'd expect from a totalitarian alliance bent on galactic domination. Apparently, they'd been steamrolling through human colonies like a particularly aggressive game of space Risk, and now they wanted information about our military positions. Here's the thing, though. I'm a cargo pilot. My biggest military decision is whether to pack the instant noodles in Sector 7 or Sector 8 of my cargo hold. I deliver medical supplies, toilet paper, and the occasional shipment of romance novels to colonies that are too embarrassed to order them through official channels. The most classified information I have access to is which stations have the best coffee in their pilot lounges. But try explaining that to aliens who are convinced every human is part of some grand military conspiracy. Vex kept insisting I was obviously a spy because, and I quote, "No human would voluntarily transport medical supplies without ulterior motives." Apparently, the concept of basic human decency was foreign to him. Go figure. Quirk at least seemed apologetic about the whole situation. He kept saying things like sorry about the restraints and, "I hope the neural probes aren't too uncomfortable," in a voice that sounded like he was genuinely concerned about my customer service experience. If this was customer service, I was definitely leaving a bad review. The whole setup screamed amateur hour. The restraints were too loose, the monitoring equipment looked like it had been assembled from spare parts, and someone had left the instruction manual open to a page titled Proper Voltage Settings for Mammalian Nervous Systems. Real professional operation they were running here. Vex explained their plan with the kind of theatrical flourish that suggested he'd been rehearsing this speech. They were going to use something called the Neurological Agony Amplifier Mark VI to extract every military secret from my brain. He was particularly proud of this device, which looked like a chrome disco ball had mated with a medical scanner and produced something that belonged in a mad scientist's wet dream. I tried explaining again that I was just a cargo pilot, that my ship's computer probably had more tactical knowledge than I did, and that the most strategic thinking I did involved planning fuel stops and avoiding space pirates. They weren't buying it. Apparently, humans had a reputation for being deceptive, which was rich coming from species that had invaded our space without so much as a formal declaration of war. But logic wasn't really their strong suit, as I was about to discover in the most unpleasant way possible. X activated the torture device with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for launching spaceships or cutting ribbons at alien grocery store openings. The machine hummed to life with a sound like a dying air conditioner, and I got the distinct impression my day was about to get significantly worse. The Neurological Agony Amplifier Mark V lived up to its name in ways that I really wish it hadn't. Imagine every nerve ending in your body suddenly deciding to throw a rave. Except instead of music, they're playing the sound of nails on chalkboards while someone sets your brain on fire. It was like having my nervous system rewired by an electrician who learned his trade from watching horror movies. Vex stood there looking incredibly pleased with himself while I did my best impression of a fish having a very bad day. The pain wasn't just physical, it was the kind of full-spectrum agony that makes you question every life choice that led to this moment. Including that time in college when I decided to major in space logistics instead of something sensible like accounting. Quirk kept checking his tablet and making worried blob noises that sounded like a deflating balloon with anxiety issues. "Commander, the neural feedback is registering at maximum parameters," he kept saying, which I think was blob speak for "holy crap, we're really hurting this human." But Vex was having the time of his life. He paced around the torture chamber like a proud parent at their kid's school play, occasionally adjusting dials and making notes on his own tablet. "Magnificent," he kept saying. "The Mark VI never fails to break a subject's will. Soon you'll be begging to tell us everything about human military installations." I would have explained again that I didn't know anything about military installations, but screaming took up most of my available vocal capacity. The machine seemed designed to target every pain receptor simultaneously while somehow making sure you stayed conscious enough to appreciate the full experience. Whoever invented this thing had clearly spent a lot of time thinking about the most efficient ways to make people miserable. The torture chamber's monitors were going crazy, displaying readouts that I assumed were measuring my vital signs, pain levels, and probably my credit score for all I knew. Quirk kept pointing at various screens and making increasingly worried noises, while Vex ignored him completely in favor of admiring his handiwork. 18 minutes, Vex announced proudly, checking his chronometer. The Mark V has never taken longer than 18 minutes to break any known species. Humans, despite their reputation for stubbornness, are apparently no exception. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to die without giving them any useful information, mainly because I didn't have any useful information to give. My biggest secret was that I sometimes ate ice cream for breakfast when I was having a bad week, which hardly qualified as military intelligence. The pain reached what I can only describe as a crescendo of awful, like a symphony orchestra, where every instrument was tuned to the frequency of pure suffering. My vision started going dark around the edges, and I could hear my heart beating irregularly in my chest. This was it. This was how Cassie Rodriguez, cargo pilot and part-time breakfast ice cream enthusiast, was going to die. My heart gave up somewhere around the 17-minute mark, which was honestly a relief at that point. The last thing I remember thinking before everything went black was that Vex was going to be really annoyed that his precious 18-minute record was technically 17 minutes and 43 seconds. Unconsciousness hit like a brick wall made of soft pillows and blessed silence. When the blackness took over, I could still hear Vex celebrating his victory. "Another successful interrogation," he was saying to Quirk. "Make a note that humans have a lower pain tolerance than expected. Quite disappointing, really. Their reputation for resilience appears to be greatly exaggerated." Quirk was making different blob noises now, the kind that suggested confusion rather than anxiety. "Commander," he was saying, "the monitors are showing some unusual readings. The subject's cardiac activity has ceased, but there are still neural fluctuations occurring." But Vex was too busy composing his report to pay attention to his assistant's concerns. He was probably already planning his promotion ceremony, imagining himself as the interrogator who finally cracked the secret of human military strategy. Too bad for him that the only strategy I knew involved finding the cheapest fuel stops and avoiding customs inspectors who looked like they were having a bad day. Death, it turned out, was surprisingly peaceful. No bright lights, no life flashing before my eyes, just a comfortable darkness that felt like the best nap I'd ever taken. If I'd known dying was this relaxing, I might have tried it sooner. Unfortunately, as I was about to discover, death apparently wasn't as permanent as I'd always assumed. Dying, as it turns out, is a lot like rebooting a computer. Everything goes dark, there's a moment of peaceful nothingness. And then suddenly you're back online with a pounding headache and the vague sense that something has gone terribly wrong with your system. I woke up on the floor of the torture chamber, which was definitely not where I expected to find myself after my heart had decided to call it quits. The cold metal against my cheek felt real enough, and the lingering taste of copper in my mouth suggested that the whole torture experience hadn't been some kind of really unpleasant dream. Above me, Commander Vex and Quirk were having what could generously be called a heated discussion, though it sounded more like a domestic dispute between a pretentious lizard and an anxious pile of Jell-O. "This is clearly an equipment malfunction," Vex was insisting, his scales shifting from green to an agitated purple. "The Mark VE does not fail. The subject must have been feigning death to avoid further interrogation. Quark was practically vibrating with anxiety, his gelatinous form wobbling as he gestured at various monitoring screens. But Commander, the cardiac readings clearly indicated complete cardiovascular failure. The subject was clinically dead for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. And look at these neural patterns. They're unlike anything in our xenobiology database. I decided this was probably a good time to announce that I was, in fact, still among the living. Excuse me, I said, struggling to sit up against the restraints that were now loose enough to slip out of. Not to interrupt your scientific debate, but the allegedly dead human is back and she has some feedback about your customer service. The look on Vex's face was priceless. Imagine a lizard trying to process the concept that his foolproof torture device might not be quite as foolproof as advertised. His mouth opened and closed several times without producing any sound, which was honestly an improvement over his usual evil monologuing. Quark, meanwhile, was having what appeared to be the blob equivalent of a panic attack. Impossible, he kept repeating, checking and rechecking his instruments. Mammals don't spontaneously return from cardiac death. It's not in any of our biological databases. This is completely unprecedented. I pulled myself up to a sitting position, feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train that had been set on fire and then struck by lightning. Look, guys, I said, I hate to break up your scientific crisis, but I'm a cargo pilot. I deliver toilet paper and instant noodles to backwater colonies. I don't know any military secrets because nobody tells military secrets to someone whose biggest tactical decision is which shipping lane has fewer pirates. This reasonable explanation seemed to offend Vex on a personal level. His scales turned an even deeper shade of purple, and he started pacing around the torture chamber like a caged animal. Impossible, he declared. All humans are part of their species' military-industrial complex. You must be a deep-cover operative sent to infiltrate Hegemony operations. I'm really not, I insisted. I'm just trying to make a living hauling cargo around the galaxy. If you want military information, why don't you just call the human military directly? I'm sure they have a customer service line or something. The suggestion that he might try a direct approach to intelligence gathering seemed to genuinely anger Vex. Apparently, his professional pride as an interrogator was tied up in his ability to torture information out of people, rather than simply asking for it politely. Who knew? The Mark VI has never failed, he repeated like a mantra. Perhaps the settings were insufficient for human physiology. We clearly need to recalibrate for your species' apparent resistance to neural disruption. Quark was still studying his readouts, making increasingly worried blob noises. Commander, I really think we should contact Xenobiology Division. These readings are completely outside normal parameters. The subject's neural activity during cardiac arrest was unlike anything we've documented. But Vex wasn't listening. He was already adjusting settings on his precious torture device, muttering about equipment calibration and human deception. I got the distinct impression that my brief experience with death was about to become significantly less brief. Wait, I said, as the realization hit me. You're not actually going to do this again, are you? Because I have to tell you, your technique needs work. The restraints are too loose, your timing is off, and frankly, the whole purple lighting thing is really overdone. If you're going for intimidating, you're landing somewhere closer to disco fever. Vex stopped adjusting his dials and stared at me with the kind of expression usually reserved for people who've just been told that their life's work is fundamentally flawed. Which, to be fair, was exactly what I'd just told him. Round 2, he announced grimly, will be far more effective. Commander Vex's idea of more effective apparently involved cranking every dial on the Neurological Agony Amplifier Mark VI up to 11, and hoping for better results. This struck me as the kind of problem-solving approach favored by people who think that if percussive maintenance doesn't work the first time, you just need a bigger hammer. Maximum settings, he announced proudly, like he'd just solved galactic hunger instead of simply turning up the torture volume. Clearly, human physiology requires more aggressive parameters than our standard protocols. The machine hummed to life with significantly more enthusiasm this time, producing a sound like an angry beehive having an argument with a jet engine. The purple lighting in the torture chamber flickered ominously, which was either a dramatic effect or a sign that Vex was about to overload his own electrical system. Either way, it didn't bode well for my immediate future. But here's the thing about being tortured to death once already. It gives you a certain perspective on the experience. The pain was definitely worse this time, like someone had taken the original Agony and run it through an amplifier designed by sadistic audio engineers. But I'd already been through this once, and I was starting to develop what could only be called spite-fueled determination. I managed to say through gritted teeth, your technique really needs work. The neural targeting is inconsistent, the pain distribution is uneven, and honestly, your dramatic timing is just terrible. Have you considered taking a class? Vex nearly dropped his tablet. Apparently, providing constructive criticism during active torture wasn't standard victim behavior. Silence, he commanded, cranking up the intensity even further. The Mark VI will break your will. The Mark 7 is a piece of junk, I replied, which made him turn an even more agitated shade of purple. The neural interface is clunky. The feedback loops are poorly calibrated, and whoever designed the user interface clearly never had to actually operate this thing. Also, your restraint system is garbage. I could probably slip out of these straps if I wanted to, but honestly, where am I going to go on a spaceship? Poor Quark was having what appeared to be a full-scale anxiety attack, his blob form practically vibrating with distress. Commander, he kept saying, this isn't normal behavior. Subjects don't usually provide equipment reviews during interrogation procedures. But I was just getting started. The pain was incredible, don't get me wrong, but anger is a powerful anesthetic, and I was discovering that I had a lot more anger than I'd previously realized. And another thing. I continued, your whole interrogation setup is amateur hour. The lighting is distracting, the temperature control is inconsistent, and this chair is incredibly uncomfortable, even without the neural disruption. Have you considered customer feedback surveys? Vex was frantically adjusting controls now, his scaled hands moving across the interface like a pianist having a nervous breakdown. Impossible, he kept muttering. No species maintains coherent speech during maximum neural disruption. This equipment is malfunctioning. The equipment is fine, I informed him. Your problem is that you're trying to torture information out of someone who doesn't have any information to give. It's like trying to squeeze orange juice out of a rock. You can apply all the pressure you want, but you're not going to get orange juice because rocks don't contain orange juice. This is basic logic. The irony of explaining basic problem-solving techniques while being actively tortured wasn't lost on me, but Vex seemed completely incapable of grasping the concept. He just kept increasing the power, apparently convinced that enough electricity could make me magically develop knowledge about military installations that I'd never seen. Also, I added, as my vision started going dark around the edges again, you might want to invest in better equipment next time. The Mark 7 is clearly last-generation technology. I bet the Mark 8 has better user reviews. This particular critique seemed to hit Vex where it hurt. The Mark VIA was obviously his pride and joy, his professional accomplishment, and here I was treating it like a poorly designed kitchen appliance. His scales were cycling through colors I didn't even have names for. My heart gave out again somewhere around the 15-minute mark this time, which was actually an improvement from my perspective. At least I was getting more efficient at dying. As consciousness faded, I could hear Quirk making increasingly distressed blob noises, while Vex ranted about equipment reliability and human deception. The last thing I thought before the darkness took me was that round 3 was probably going to be even more interesting. By the 4th time I came back from the dead, I was starting to treat the whole experience like a particularly unpleasant job interview, where the interviewer kept asking the same questions and refusing to accept that I wasn't qualified for the position they were trying to fill. So, I said, stretching as I sat up on the torture chamber floor, that was marginally better than last time. Your timing is improving, though I'd still give it a 6 out of 10 for technique. The neural targeting is still inconsistent, and you're not maintaining steady pressure throughout the process. Have you considered practicing on a simulator first? Commander Vex looked like he was having some kind of existential crisis. His scales had settled into a sickly yellow color that suggested either deep confusion or the alien equivalent of nausea. Possibly both. "This is impossible," he kept repeating, like a broken record player that had gotten stuck on the least helpful track possible. Quirk, meanwhile, had given up on his tablet entirely and was just staring at me with what I assumed passed for fascination among anxiety-ridden blob creatures. "Commander," he said hesitantly, "perhaps we should consider alternative interrogation methods. Traditional psychological techniques, perhaps? Bribery? Asking nicely?" But Vex was having none of it. His professional pride was apparently more important than basic logic or evidence, which explained a lot about how he'd ended up in the torture business in the first place. "The Mark VI is infallible," he declared, though his voice lacked the confidence it had held during our first session. "Human biology must be more resilient than our databases indicated." "My biology is fine," I corrected him. "Your approach is flawed. You're trying to extract information that doesn't exist from someone who doesn't have it. It's like trying to withdraw money from an empty bank account. The transaction isn't going to work no matter how many times you try it." Round 5 went much the same as rounds 3 and 4, except I started rating the experience in real time. "Okay, that's definitely an improvement in the opening phase," I commented as the neural disruption kicked in. "Much smoother ramp up. But you're still losing consistency in the middle section, and the finale needs work. You want to build to a crescendo, not just slam everything to maximum and hope for the best." By round 6, I'd moved on to suggesting specific equipment modifications. "Have you considered upgrading your neural interface system?" I asked, while my nervous system was being turned into an avant-garde light show. The current setup is clearly designed for species with different neural architectures. You need better adaptation protocols. Also, this chair is murder on the lower back. Ergonomics matter in professional torture environments. The really interesting development was that other crew members had started gathering outside the torture chamber to listen to my commentary. Apparently, a human providing constructive criticism during active torture was unusual enough to draw a crowd. Quirk mentioned that some of the junior officers had started taking notes, which suggested they were either very dedicated to their jobs or this was the most entertaining thing that had happened on the ship in months. "You know what your real problem is?" I said during round 7. After dying had become so routine that I barely noticed the transition anymore. "You're not adapting your technique to your subject. Every species is different. Every individual is different. You're using a one-size-fits-all approach to a problem that requires customization. It's like trying to perform surgery with a sledgehammer." Vex was no longer responding to my suggestions. He'd moved past denial and anger into what appeared to be the alien equivalent of a complete psychological breakdown. He just stood there adjusting dials randomly while making small whimpering sounds that seemed deeply inappropriate for someone in his position. "Also," I continued, "you might want to consider that continuous torture isn't actually an effective interrogation technique. Research shows that people under extreme duress will say anything to make the pain stop, regardless of whether it's true or not. You're optimizing for compliance, not accuracy." Quirk was practically bouncing with what I assumed was excitement. "This is fascinating," he told one of the junior officers who'd gathered to watch. "Human psychology is far more complex than our training material suggested. The subject has adapted to the torture experience and is now treating it as a learning opportunity. It's called coping mechanisms," I explained helpfully. "Humans are remarkably good at adapting to terrible situations. We've had a lot of practice throughout our evolutionary history. Plus, spite is an incredibly powerful motivator." By the time I died for the 7th time, I was pretty sure I'd completely broken Commander Vex's worldview. His precious Mark VI, the device that was supposed to represent the pinnacle of interrogation technology, but had become nothing more than an expensive way to give a human multiple opportunities to criticize his professional competence. The last thing I heard before losing consciousness was the sound of approaching footsteps that were significantly heavier than either Vex or Quirk could produce. Apparently, our little educational seminar had attracted some high-level attention. Admiral Lox arrived to find half his crew gathered around a torture chamber, like spectators at the galaxy's most disturbing sporting event. The fact that they were taking notes and having quiet discussions about interrogation techniques probably should have been his first clue that something had gone seriously wrong with what was supposed to be a routine intelligence gathering operation. I was in the middle of my 8th resurrection, stretching out the kinks in my neck while providing feedback on the latest session. Better consistency that time, I was saying to Vex, who had progressed from psychological breakdown to what appeared to be catatonic staring. Though you're still not maintaining proper neural interface calibration throughout the process, have you considered automated adjustment protocols? Admiral Vex was a massive creature that looked like someone had crossed a rhinoceros with a military bureaucrat and given the result anger management issues. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of authority that suggested he was used to people jumping when he said jump and not asking questions about the physics involved. Commander Vex, he rumbled. Would you care to explain why my interrogation specialist is taking professional advice from his torture victim? Vex just pointed at me with a trembling claw and made small whimpering sounds. Clearly his communication skills had degraded significantly since our first meeting. Work, meanwhile, was practically vibrating with excitement. Admiral, he said, this human has demonstrated unprecedented resistance to neural disruption torture. She's died 7 times and keeps returning to consciousness with full cognitive function intact. It's revolutionizing our understanding of human physiology and psychology. 8 times, I corrected. And it's not that complicated. Humans are stubborn. When you annoy us, we get spiteful. When you hurt us, we get angry. When you try to break us, we adapt. It's basically our species' entire survival strategy. Admiral Vex studied me with the kind of expression that suggested he was rapidly recalculating several assumptions about human biology and the feasibility of conquering our species through traditional methods. You're telling me, he said slowly, that humans can simply choose not to stay dead? Well, not exactly, I replied. I'm pretty sure this isn't normal human behavior. I think your torture device might be interacting with human neurology in ways that weren't anticipated by whoever designed it. You're essentially giving me a really unpleasant form of CPR every time my heart stops. This explanation seemed to horrify Admiral Vex more than the resurrection thing had. Are you suggesting that our most advanced interrogation technology is malfunctioning? I'm suggesting that your most advanced interrogation technology wasn't designed with human biology in mind, I said. Also, you've been torturing a civilian cargo pilot who doesn't know any military secrets, because nobody tells military secrets to someone whose job involves hauling toilet paper around the galaxy. The silence that followed this revelation was the kind of silence that suggests everyone in the room is simultaneously realizing they've made a terrible mistake. You're a civilian? Admiral Vex asked. I keep trying to tell people that, I said. I deliver medical supplies, hygiene products, and romance novels to colonies that are too remote or too embarrassed to get them through official channels. The most classified information I have access to is which space stations have the best coffee in their pilot lounges. Admiral Vex looked at Commander Vex, who was still making small whimpering sounds, then at Quirk, who was frantically checking his databases, then back at me. And you don't know anything about human military installations? Nothing, I confirmed. I avoid military installations whenever possible. They have terrible parking, and the security checkpoints take forever. The Admiral's expression suggested he was having the kind of day that ends with strongly worded memos about proper target verification procedures. Release her, he ordered. Sir? Quirk asked, apparently confused by the concept of letting torture victims go. Release her, return her to her ship, and issue a formal apology for the inconvenience, Admiral Vex clarified. And make a note in our operational procedures that torturing civilians who don't possess relevant information is both inefficient and embarrassing. An hour later, I was back in my cargo ship, updating my logbook with the day's events. Delivered medical supplies to Outer Rim Colony 7, I typed. Slight delay due to alien bureaucracy. Note, avoid Hegemony space until they improve their customer service training. As I prepared to jump to hyperspace, I couldn't help but smile. The Hegemony had learned an important lesson about human stubbornness, and I'd learned that dying wasn't nearly as permanent as I'd always assumed. All in all, it had been an educational experience for everyone involved. My cargo ship disappeared into hyperspace, leaving behind a very confused alien crew and one former interrogator who was probably going to need therapy. Just another day in the life of a civilian cargo pilot, really.